This is House Planning Help, episode 309. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build or retrofit. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up, two architects from top architecture practice Archetype. That's Polly Upton and Kirk Rushby. They share their self-build story. Lots in this one, a tight hold on the purse strings. In fact, just making something a reality. That's a large part of this story, taking steps towards making things happen. Obviously, it helps that they're architects. Great design, problem solving in here. A lot of interesting stuff in this episode. But first, I've decided to kick off a new part-time feature. So this is all about when low energy or sustainable, whatever we're going to call it, building breaks into the mainstream. It must be in a significant or entertaining way. Those are the two criteria to add. Today.
We bring the stars out. We bring the women and the cars out. Let's have a toast, a celebration, get a glass out. And we can do this until we pass out.
You weren't expecting that, were you? That's rapper Tiny Temper, big hit in 2010. Why on earth would I play you a clip of that? Well, it's actually something that happened the other day. I was just switching off whatever program we were watching on the TV in the evening and happened to flick through Channel 4's Extraordinary Extensions. And guess who was presenting? Yes, it was Tiny Temper. And what caught my eye, I suppose, more was actually the guest on there was Richard Dujitsky, who we've had on the podcast before. If you delve back to House Planning Help, episode 235, you will find him as our guest. So I just flicked onto this. This is pretty much the point where I came in.
Here, Richard and Eva are using line render. Because they're trying to achieve an airtight house, this allows all the moisture to escape. If they used regular plaster, they'd be left with interstitial condensation. You don't want that.
Now, I've watched my fair share of property programmes over the years, and I don't think I've ever heard any presenter reference interstitial condensation. It goes deep at that point, and you try and avoid it, so respect to Tiny. But listen to how they wrapped up the whole of this episode.
I'm really impressed by what Richard and Eva have achieved. We all need to be thinking about energy consumption, and I'm feeling so inspired right now. So you know what? My next project is going to be a passive house. It's the future.
This is it. It gets under the skin, doesn't it? And Tiny, when you've built that passive house, I want you to report back to House Planning Help HQ and have a debrief here. That would be good. Let's get to our featured interview today. It's a case study and it's a standout house in its location. Of course, two architects. I think it really does help. Tight budget. And I suppose that's what's interesting here is how that money is being spent. You can still get results with a smallish budgets. I started my chat with Polly Upton and Kirk Rushby by asking them to tell me a little bit about themselves.
Polly and I are both architects. We have both been working for a practice you probably know quite well, called Archetype. We've both been there quite a while now. I think I've been there on and off for 12, 13 years or something.
I think it might be a little bit longer than that.
Maybe even longer.
Both been there through our part ones, part twos.
Yeah.
And is it every architect's dream to build a house, do you think?
I think most probably want to, but it's quite an opportunity to get to do it, isn't it?
I always think it's a good sign, though, as well. And it's nice to have almost a little group of Archetype members who've gone on to build their own house. So let's hear about your story today. And yeah, when did that start? When did it get realistic?
Well, how do we even do it? So
we're living in a very cold Victorian house in Hereford and thought we're preaching about passive house at work and working on it with lots of our projects, and wouldn't it be nice to live in a passive house one day?
Yeah.
And then, so started looking for a site.
I think for us it was sort of opportunistic, a few opportunities that aligned for us. I think we were in a point where we were saving money anyway, because we'd bought a house that we literally could afford on quite small wages at the time, and we just had wage increases and we stayed in that house. We'd looked at other things. At the time we were looking at whether we'd buy another house. We looked at other properties. Nothing just met our standards really. Like we looked at other houses and we just couldn't bear to really almost buy anything. So we were just saving money for a larger deposit on something else. And we went to an auction, saw a couple of sites go. We thought we'd just go and see how they are. And they went for extortionate amounts. We just couldn't even think of affording it at the time. This was on for less than them, but closer to what we could probably afford. But we still probably weren't anywhere near it. And so we had our eye on it. We'd come and looked at it, but it then went through the process of being sold to someone else. And then that fell through. And then in between that time, we had managed to save a bit more money. And then we just got quite close to being able to afford it. And we just told them we were cash buyers, and we put in a relatively low offer and got it. Because it wasn't really a perfect site for us. It wasn't. And I think if you look for perfection, that's when you're like competing for everyone else. And when we came here, it was just sort of like, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's constraints and problems. And you could see why it was cheaper than other sites, potentially. But again, that probably is what made it affordable for us.
And it had been on the market for quite a long time. And the house next door was for sale, same people.
I think biding your time as well while actively looking is a really positive approach. This site, though, I find interesting. It has one key constraint, but maybe you could list that and some of the others that you saw.
Well, the obvious one is the access.
Yeah.
Under quite a low tunnel under the railway, which obviously makes getting materials in quite difficult. It didn't have any services onto the site itself, services all around, so that's something that I think puts quite a lot of people off.
Yeah.
It's down a track that's very potholey, so again, people normally like to have cars that the suspension's not knackered all the time. And noise from the train line, I think people might worry about.
Yeah, and the
that.
train line probably.
Yeah.
We thought that might be, but we obviously just knowing that as a starting point, we were going to build a passive house. It's just something that didn't put us off. I think years ago I'd been to see one in Ledbury, and being in that and seeing there was a main road right by the house, and just thinking I can't hear anything. So this site potentially I thought would put other people off, but not us, because we knew that would potentially not be an issue, really.
Well, that is going to be a test today. We will put our best microphone ears on and listen for any trains going by and see how we do.
Let's hope we get a freight train.
The auction process, that's interesting. Was that an active area that you were looking, thinking that there are often opportunities that come through there? You know, there's normally something that you've got to try and address with an auction lot. Was that why you started looking there, or you were just looking everywhere anyway?
Just looking everywhere.
Yeah, we were looking for it. I mean, we really, at that point, when we were looking, we knew we couldn't afford anything, but I think we were looking because we thought, maybe in 5 years or something, and you kind of need to suss things out anyway. There's a lot of time, I think, in just knowing where good sites are, where bad sites are, different places you can buy sites.
Yeah, and we'd also looked at ones that were had full planning on them already, that we didn't really like the designs of them and didn't really work very well with Passive House. And then we looked at ones that didn't have any planning on, so it was much more of a risk. But this one had outline permission for a rectangle, so again that was good for us because we were architects. Obviously we could design our own house and not have to pay lots of fees to do that, but for other people that might put them off.
So it got rid of the risk of the principle of planning permission, but we weren't constrained by design, which was perfect, really.
So take us through some of the design process, and also bearing in mind you've mentioned a couple of times money. How did you address that?
Basically being really tight. That's essentially
well, you've effectively said that you can't build a house to begin with. You started all this process. You know, I love that, the fact that you said, well, this is not even realistic, and you're still looking and trying to make it happen, and here we are.
Yeah.
We had actually looked at another site, and we actually costed it up, and it didn't stack up to us. It's an inner city site, and we're lucky because we have access to some cost information being architects, and there's a little bit of experience there. So there's general figures that we can work to. But then we just got more and more detailed with it. We started with a general kind of, this is how much we think we can do it for, based on a rough square metre figure. And then we drilled down into actually what we're going to build it out of, and got each thing priced up. And
designed a house of one size, and then gradually kept making it smaller.
It was.
For a little bit.
There was loads of refinement, actually. We realised that, I think we designed like a 160 square metre house, and then we realised that we probably couldn't afford that, and then we realised that maybe we didn't even need it. So we sort of shaved about 30 square metres off and didn't really feel like we'd lost anything.
It just gradually got a little bit smaller until we thought if it gets any smaller, then it's going to be difficult to make the space planning work, particularly downstairs where the bedrooms are.
And do you see eye to eye all the time?
No.
No, absolutely no. That's a tough thing. I mean, I think spoke to other people about this, and about most of the people we work with, their partners aren't architects. The issue they have is convincing their partner of certain choices. So they're the person that's maybe trying to push something a bit different. We don't have that problem. The different problem we have is two strong opinions too.
Yeah, and somehow we've got to meet in the middle-ish.
And I suppose we've both had a similar sort of work experience, having worked at Archetype for quite a while. So there's a lot of practical choices that made a lot of sense to both of us that were just made quite quickly because it was just the way we do it. There's just things that are sensible. It's little details that's where you really start healthy discussion about what's the right thing. Finishes, wall finishes. It's that stuff that really becomes really important.
But the fundamentals of bedrooms on the ground floor, living in the middle, that was easy. And
then I remember there was early discussions, there were ideas about what the important things are. Like the view was something we just both went, that's quite clearly important.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a few key decisions that we agreed on quite quickly.
You've talked about the bedrooms downstairs, big advantages of being cool. You've also got a double height space. So maybe you could just explain the upper floor as well, or the half floor.
Well, I suppose the top floor, we use it as an office. Essentially what we've done is create the form of a 2-storey house but with a half storey on top of it. And that was because of the view, because we wanted to get high, get a good view. But at the same time we knew we were constrained by form because there were adjacent buildings that were of a certain size, so you're limited to size. So essentially that was driven by trying to get high, get a good view, but at the same time not make the building too tall.
Well, and it uses the space within the thermal envelope rather than having a cold loft space, which lots of houses do have.
You talk about the getting up high. There are obviously restrictions there. So how did you go? You had outline planning. What was that process like, getting it all the way through?
Yeah, not too bad. What we had was an outline on a plan. They'd had the principle of a 3-4 bed house approved, and it was just drawing up the elevations and the plans in more detail, orientating it. And we did have a bit of discussion with the planner about the cladding and the form of it, but it wasn't a hugely difficult discussion, was it? It was just...
No, it was just backing up why we'd made those decisions. I guess the biggest one is the corrugated metal cladding for the roof and the walls, and making a justification as to why that was a good idea. And either side of us is red tiled roof and red brick, and then the rest of them up the lane are slate and render and brick again. So it kind of made sense to fit within that colour palette between those two houses. And in terms of material, we had to convince the planner about the detailing, provide some precedence to show it wasn't going to look like quite a big agricultural clunky shed, and it was going to be quite refined. So yeah, once we've done that, then we're quite happy.
How are you going to build this then?
So we knew timber frame, and also just because we knew we had the site constraints, and we thought, let's not add complexity, let's do some things that we know. And that's something we did know.
Yeah. And we knew that we couldn't do a panelised timber frame system because we couldn't get it under the railway line, so we knew we had to stick build it.
When you say get them in, what does that mean? Can you just use a lorry to come through? I know you've obviously got dimensions of this little tunnel to go through, but how restrictive is it?
Well, that's the other thing. So one of the big things was the foundation. So we didn't want to pour concrete. We sort of had to design to allow for the possibility that the delivery couldn't get through and that we might have to manhandle a few things through. So one of the early choices when we met Andrew, the structural engineer, was trying to go for a non-concrete foundation. And what was really good, he was open-minded to it almost instantly.
Well, and Nick Grant had
been pushing the idea
for
a while.
Ages. And Andrew, I think.
Yeah, he'd been pushing a sort of idea of something like that for a while. So essentially, we've got a compacted gravel foundation. And that just means that if we get stuck, we always knew that there's an area the other side of the tunnel that a lorry could just dump something and Matt could basically dump a truck it through, and you've got nothing going off, you've got no risks of the concrete going off, you've not got time constraints, you can just deal with that.
When we started building it, obviously we didn't really know the people around us that well. We didn't know who would be kind and let us drop stuff off in various places and things like that. And I think as the build progressed, we became more and more comfortable with what we could and couldn't do, asking favours from people and things like that. So eventually, actually, the big aggregate wagons that came, the farmer allowed us to come through the farm and down this way, but only a certain time of year and if the weather wasn't too bad. So we could do slightly more than we thought we might be able to, but it was still a bit restricted.
But again, that's quite interesting, isn't it? That some people might have looked at that constraint and then given up, and you have followed it through to actually discover certain times of year you've maybe more access than you first thought. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think the actual scary thing about it when we started was that it felt relatively simple, because we'd got it to a point where, like, masonry would probably come on large pallets, be very difficult to get through. We knew that if they dumped all the I-beams, they're relatively light, you can lift them and just walk them through, or just put them on Matt's van, or,
Now that we're talking about builders, this is, in some scenarios, I would say never do, but tell us about your builder.
So the builder was my brother. We still get on very well.
Well, there we go. And this can work, but I would say equally, you've got to be careful. So how did you know he was right for the job and that this was the way to go?
Because he works very, very hard. He thinks very hard before he does things about what he's going to do, and plans very well, and he's very cheeky with certain suppliers. And just he knows the building industry quite well because he's been in it since he left school. So we knew that he wasn't going to mess around and he'd work hard. And then because his home was actually quite a long way away, he lived with us during the week. So we'd get back from work, or he'd get back, and we'd have really intense discussions about what we're going to do the next day, the next week, the next month.
Matt's got a general can-do attitude, which is just really, like, in this situation, is really useful, because you talk through the logical way of doing it. Quite often the solution you come up with is not what a typical contractor would come up with.
Am I right in thinking that he hadn't built a house before, but he had all the skills?
Yeah, not an entire house. He'd done a really big extension refurb on his house. Before that, he'd been mostly building fences. Big fencing projects, really, really big ones, but still he'd never built a whole house.
The thing is, though, it's carpentry skills, really, isn't it, when you get down to timber? And I've heard this a number of times, get a good carpenter, maybe they haven't built a house, but if they can keep something plumb and get it all...
Yeah, but it's all the groundworks and things as well, getting all the drainage and all the site levels, and I think that's where we really benefited from his previous experience, was that he'd done all of that, which... other people would have got a groundworks contractor in to do all that, and then got your main contractor in to do the bit above the ground.
And was it easy enough to negotiate with him about what his pay should be and all these sorts of things?
He basically just told us a day rate, and we just said, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, we were pretty naive.
Weirdly simple. That's the thing.
I don't believe you 1 second. You know what the good day rate.
Off your brother.
Well, that's it. I was going to say, did he do it as a favour, and he built it all for free for you?
Well, we had a lot of other help from my dad, who did a lot of work for.
He did.
Good old dads.
To get him out of the house, I think, really. But no, he said I think his rate was a little bit cheaper than he charges other people, but again, it depends who he's working for, really.
Yeah.
How long did this all take, and were there any key challenges during the build?
Just over a year for us to get in, year and...
I think it's like 15 months,
quarter,
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Challenges, services. Matt got really far on batteries and an extension cable.
Well, we started January 2020.
Yeah.
And we didn't get electricity on site until January 2021. So he built everything with batteries, a very kind neighbour's extension cable from their garage, water, just a bit of...
A bucket.
We didn't need much, bucket from there.
But that was another benefit of all the dry construction.
Yeah.
And there was hardly any need for water.
Yeah, it was only the plastering, really, wasn't it, that needed anything, so...
Yeah.
What about assistance? You mentioned your dad. Is that as far as it goes, or was there anyone else labouring? Or
Matt's mate Morley came for a few weeks.
Yeah.
He got another friend in to help when they put the windows in, when they had the window delivery. But that's about it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, we paid him a day rate. And then we paid the farmer a day rate because he had a telehandler to get the windows in. And essentially we got the windows dropped at the post office just over the road. And each one was then brought through, if they were small enough, in Matt's van, or the large ones.
I just like the idea of dropping it off at the post office. I think that's great.
We actually,
There'll be a telehandler coming through soon.
Oh, they were really good. They took the whole of the timber delivery, and actually the local builders merchants just across the main road at Pontralis Merchants, they took some quite big deliveries for us as well, didn't they? Because they've got small vans that will come through the tunnel.
It's a lot of small favours actually from quite a lot of people.
As this time goes on, you've talked about your evening discussions over little details and questions that you might have, but what else are you doing during the construction process, thinking of the final finishes and so forth?
We've done a lot of construction details, but a lot of it would be liaising with Matt about literally what we're going to build the next day or the next week.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you have 2D details, but he needs to understand exactly how it's going together. So there'd be a lot of discussion about that, and we'd be talking through that, ordering materials, doing a lot of that.
We did all the ordering of everything,
ordering.
basically. Matt did a little bit, but most of it was us.
Would you call yourself project managers as well as all the, you know, architecture that you've done?
I think we'd have to.
In this case, I suppose so.
Yeah.
We sort of managed it between us and Matt.
I think what was also quite fortunate was that I was on maternity leave. Well, we did shared parental leave, so I was on maternity leave. Kirk then took over and did shared
Parental
leave
leave.
until, what was it, mid-August last year. So for the first nearly 8 months we were...
There was a bit of time.
There was a bit of time, yeah.
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 It was squeezing in.
But it meant we
Borders.
could come and see the site in the daytime when he was here, squeeze the orders in.
Yeah, squeezing in orders between nap times and feeding and...
Nearly rolling off the cot whilst you're speaking to building control, that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is the lovely thing, that when you think of this house, that you're making it a proper home now, and your son's just going to take it all for granted.
Yeah.
And I think it was actually a nice, you know, shared parental leave. It can be a little bit maddening, actually, and a little bit sort of isolating. So it's actually a nice side thing to do that keeps your mind occupied in a different way in between the feeding and the
Bottoms.
and the bottoms, and the nappies, and
Anything else we should know about during the construction and the finishing towards the end of the process?
If you're going to install rigid ductwork for your MVHR, do it before you've put your external sheathing board up.
Well, the coupling, they basically, you have to do rigid ducts. So when you've got your joists in, you have to kind of cut them up and then couple them back together. But that didn't end up being a massive...
No, it was actually fine, but we were just, are we going to get those big lengths in?
Yeah.
Because I think we'd had the warm cell put in by that point, so we couldn't just make a hole in the sheathing board and slide it through. So,
did it feel any different doing something for yourself versus for a client?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Massively. Whether it's better or worse, I don't know. Just loads of choices, isn't there? I mean, that's the thing. It's choices. It's just everything. And then you get to a certain point and you think, oh, we're doing really well. And then actually, once you get inside, your choices just accelerate. They don't decelerate. They actually get more because you're dealing with smaller bits. And like the wall finish, we spent ages trying to work out what wall finish we're doing.
And that wasn't just because we couldn't decide what we wanted to do at the time. Because of COVID, there were quite big supply chain issues. So are we going to have it lovely lime plastered? But we haven't really got the reveal depth inside for that now. Should we just do standard plaster and plasterboard? Oh, there's no plasterboard, we can't get hold of that for months. Shall we do something else instead? So it wasn't just that we couldn't decide.
Yeah.
And there's sort of bigger things there.
And what have you thought of Passive House? You obviously do a lot of it at work, but what has it been like to live in as a home?
It's been amazing.
Well, we've had the summer where some of the days are getting up to 31 and we've been pretty comfortable. The top floor, it got probably up to around 25-ish at the worst, but really, compared to other people, we were really comfortable.
Yeah, and I think, as probably with any new house or any house that you move into, it takes a bit of adjusting to and learning how to use it. And so I think when it first started to get warm, we haven't actually put the brise-soleil on the south-facing ground floor window and door yet. So it started getting a bit warm. We thought, that's not too bad. And then we put a tarp up over them, and that then actually really helped with reducing the overheating. So that was good. And then you learn that about 1 o'clock you need to close the shutters on the big west
Well,
doors.
tell us about these, because this is something that fascinates me, and I love the manual nature of it, the simplicity of these, and that it effectively has allowed you to have some nice big windows here with the view.
The view is a big thing, but it's west. So the trouble with that is it's very difficult to deal with the overheating. The controlling the gains on the south is really straightforward. It's just an overhang that's an appropriate size, or just some brise-soleil. On the west, it's a bit harder, and really just shutters made sense because they just allowed you that view when you want it, and then probably for about 4 or 5 hours a day, you just have to close them in the summer.
So they're just the same material as the cladding, corrugated metal in a metal frame on a runner that just, well, there's 2 of them, one rolls in from each side and just covers over the, what's it, 3.5 metre by
2.1ish
2.1ish opening. So it's, in terms of overheating, it's a significant area to try and control.
Quite interesting as well to see 2 big fixed glazing. Is this the south side? Is that on the south side? So tell us about the decision. Is it because of the size of the windows that you've gone that way, that it would have been clumsy to do anything with, or?
We didn't want to break up any of the windows. We wanted a kind of window arrangement where each window was just the opening, and so we sized each one for what we thought was appropriate. And then when we sized these ones, they were quite big, so it's quite difficult with an opener. So we kind of just went for a strategy where we would just say, okay, east and west, they all open anyway, so you can get cross vent, so we don't need to open them. So
the combination between daylighting but also not having too many windows.
Yeah.
And so we went for 2 big ones on this elevation instead of 3 small ones, because then you've got fewer thermal bridges, less complication. It's just a little bit simpler. And the same with all the other windows. They're carefully placed to get either views or light or a bit of cross ventilation.
Yeah.
But I think there's no unnecessary window probably in the whole house.
I mean, maybe these ones could have been smaller, but I remember just playing about with them in PHPP, and reducing them didn't really do a lot. And we quite like the fact that you get a really good view of the trees. I mean, actually, what was quite nice is these 2 sides. You almost feel like you're in a tree house, really. You get just being able to see the canopy is quite nice.
Some of that as well is the upside down living, isn't it? There's no doubt about it. If the site's right, I think it's a great way to live. Is there anything you have learnt through this, or anything you do differently?
If we start with the thing I've learnt, is how hard it is to get service connections, and how it might be nice actually to buy a service plot, but actually if you're willing to be quite patient and dogged, and you can get it done. It's just...
So why was that? What was slowing things down, or just the whole process of it?
It just took ages. I think we started trying to get the ball rolling the summer before we started building, and we didn't get the last telephone line in until we'd already moved it, and so it took a long time. And it's just because of the various different departments and all the hoops that you have to jump through, and if you're not used to doing it, you don't know the process, so you've always got to spend more time asking people. And then we had a few issues with where the existing services are around the house in terms of connecting into those, and people letting us connect into various points or not. And
it was 2 things. One is utilities companies don't really have the same sense of urgency that you do, and 2, in a lot of cases you have to have agreements with third parties, which can get quite complicated.
And just some of the things that aren't very joined up in terms of some of the service providers. I think they could be a bit smoother, but we got there in the end. Yeah. So that's the main thing we've learned.
Yeah, and the do differently. Did you come up with anything?
There's a couple of finished things. We in the bar again. Everything we did because we were trying to think of a straightforward and simple way to do it, and not cost too much money. In the bathroom, we've gone for this. We've actually used like a roofing finish, which kind of works really well. It's like a wet room, but it doesn't look that great because it's a roofing flush.
It's basically a GRP roof in the shower.
It's basically, it's like a GRP roof in the shower. But it works really well.
It's waterproof.
Yeah.
I'm assuming if it irks you enough, you could change that later down the line.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally, things are working out really well. I mean, there's a couple of things like with the floorboards, particularly with the passive house, getting the MVHR on, the humidity really kind of stabilises. And with programme, we really need to get the floorboards in and we need to do the plastering. So plastered, the humidity was up a little bit. Put the floorboards in. We did leave them in to sort of acclimatise them a bit and dry the plaster out. But then once we got the MVHR on, we realised that the humidity probably dropped even more. So they've had a little bit of shrinkage. It's not too bad.
It was summer going into winter when the house was plastered and the floorboards went in at the same time, and then there was obviously no heating all the way through until spring. So things taken a while to dry out and humidity levels to even out a bit.
A lot of things we do differently might be programme things that you might want to go more straightforward, but the reality of it is that you get delays with certain things and you can never have complete 100% control of it all. So
and you need to try and fill the time with things that you can do.
Just crack on. I mean, I was quite glad overall actually that we just we got it done in 15 months because we just kept things moving. I think that's quite important.
Now, this seems to me a good experience, which as architects makes me wonder, is this a house for some time, or are you going to get tempted off somewhere else and do it all again?
It's tempting.
We can never say, as architects,
You're not going to commit on this one, are you?
We can never say never. That's,
Yeah.
Never say we'd never do it again.
Personally, I bizarrely really enjoyed the experience.
I
I just enjoyed the process of getting things built. So I think we'll be here for a while.
Yeah.
We're no plans to go out and find another site at the moment, but I would.
It's just interesting. Interesting. Well, I think it's a really inspiring story, and I love the fact that you've got the house even though you couldn't afford it. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this episode, houseplanninghelp.com/309. There's a summary of the conversation, including the main lessons learned. I do wish I'd pushed them a bit more on their design phase and how they were revising their designs, making things smaller and smaller to marry up with the budget. Because as a client, I don't think it's quite so easy. Often the time that you're getting a number on the project is when you go out to tender, and then quite a lot of work has been done by that stage. If you're one of our hub members though, Polly and Kirk go into even more detail so you can hear them explain the project and show you some of the different design elements that we've touched on today. But yeah, a bit more detailed there. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, you can either do that within the show notes or on social media. We've got the links for you. We'll link to Archetype, all of that at houseplanninghelp.com/309. Let's conclude today with a hub update. This is our membership community designed for you if you plan to go about building a high performance home using really good materials and just doing as much as you can to make yourself comfortable and be thinking about the environment as well. One of the core elements of the hub is our in-depth video case studies where you can watch through entire builds, get your head around what is it that I'm going to have to do. We always like focusing on the decision-making process. So this is our Kimver story. It's a retrofit project to Passive House standard, a mid-terrace Victorian property. Very interesting, been completely eye-opening to me. So far, we've seen the building be stripped back to its bare bones. And now, at the rear of the property, they've adjusted the levels and they're ready for the concrete pour, for the new foundations, for the extension. And inside, another key part of what they're doing is opening up the spaces because some of the rooms were a bit pokey before. So now they're introducing some steels and we see that steelwork. Very interesting video, this current chapter, in fact. So delve into our in-depth video case studies in the hub. If you're serious about building a home, no matter where you are in the journey, we've got people looking for land, people with properties that they're looking to retrofit, people some of the way through, people at the end of the process who just want to stick around. They're all in the hub. Come and join us with our courses, live training calls, private members only forum, and get input from me on your project. I'm more than happy to do what I can. All of this help for you in the hub. Houseplanninghelp.com/join to find out more. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.